You got it right
Hello
that
and
time.
welcome. Sorry. Hello and welcome to the Awkward Well, I'm Emily.
And I'm KristaLyn. And this is your spiritual podcast for grounded people. Um,
It is.
it's my
Sorry.
fault, everybody. I did that. I'm sorry. We will be grounding ourselves today a little bit, but honestly, catharsis is important too. So I guess that's why it's starting the way it is. And we are not the only ones who are going to be helping you through this week, which feels very emotional and has a lot going on. Um, we brought in an expert in mental health to be able to help us through this. Angela, hi.
Hi, it's such a treat to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Truly and 100,000%. Thank you for being here. You are, sir, for anybody who doesn't know, Angela is one of our favorite human beings in the entire world.
Yeah. We love Angela
Yeah.
so
So
much.
when this week was on our horizon and became a reality, um, we had already wanted to support the work that you're doing, Angela, with basically what is it, the stop, drop, and roll of mental health, which I can't wait to ask you more about. But then this week became a reality, and we thought, wow, what a perfect opportunity where the world needs not only the glowing light that you bring and the positivity that you just exude, but the actual tangible resources that you have and that you have been steeped in for a while. You know what you are doing when it comes to resilience and resistance and mental health and all of these things. And so we defer to you. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you're passionate about, and maybe a little bit about the stop, drop, and roll of mental health?
Really
Except
quick
M
before you do
has
that
something.
too, just a disclaimer and reminder for all of
Mhm.
our people. We are recording this on Monday. We have no absolute idea what is
Yeah.
happening on Thursday. We don't know. We
Never
haven't lived it
forget we're
yet.
in the past.
You have lived it. We have not. So if you're like, what do you mean this week things worked out for the best? We don't know. We were not there.
Mhm.
That's what like hold that space. Anyway,
I've
continue,
studied
Angela.
astrology though, so
Yeah,
I'm pretty
it's
confident
not
with you,
great,
Angela,
but
right now.
anyway,
So
listen about yourself, Angela. Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're beautiful. And like, please share in the comments, like how you're feeling when you hear this, like right later this
Mhm.
week. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so for me, my mental health journey, I have always experienced a lot of social anxiety. And so it's taken me a long time to get more comfortable, like being in social settings and being like a social human. Um, and my mental health, like public journey, really started in 2018. So I started hosting a mental wellness meetup for the local music community in Denver. So we just kind of meet up in a coffee shop once a month, say, hey, if you are part of the music community or you listen to music, then come to this meetup. And so people started showing up, which was great. And of course, the first time I was so nervous. I was like, one, what if nobody shows up? And two, what if people show up and they like don't want to talk about anything? So the first meeting I showed up super prepared, like ready to talk about, like fill the space if nobody was there or nobody wanted to talk about stuff. But the good news is people did show up and then they did have stuff to talk about, which was awesome. And so I grew that over a couple months. But then, and just as a quick trigger warning for folks, like I am going to talk about something very briefly that is a little bit heavy. So if you are not in the space to receive that, go ahead and skip ahead like 5 minutes. But there was one meeting a couple months in where I had somebody come who was like very openly expressing suicidal ideation. And it was in that moment where I realized, okay, this is now real. Like if I'm trying to create space for folks to talk about this stuff, I have to be prepared when we are maybe going into more denser energies. And so right after that, luckily my co-founder had already been trained in mental health first aid and was working at the mental health center in Denver. So he was able to navigate that properly, but I also wanted those tools as well. So after that, I went and got a grant from the city of Denver, and I was able to use that money to turn what we were doing into a nonprofit, but then also use that money to get certified to teach mental health first aid. So I got certified to teach mental health first aid in February 2020. Of course, we all know what happened in March 2020. So it was just really interesting timing because also at that time, the National Council required those classes to be taught in person. Like there was no digital curriculum. And so I was fully prepared to teach this in person. And so then when everything went into lockdown, the National Council for Mental Wellbeing actually like arguably had to scramble a little bit. Like they'd already started working on it, but they had to rush to put out the digital curriculum so we could teach this over Zoom. So I wasn't able to actually teach my first mental health first aid class until we were like 6 months into the pandemic. But I just feel so grateful that the timing of that, so that I was able to hold space for folks and get people trained in mental health first aid, which is research-based, evidence-based, and give people the tools to actually have proper conversations with folks. Uh, I'll pause there. Does anyone, any questions? I can keep going too.
No,
You're amazing. Fantastic.
yeah, I love the timing of it all and how it clearly seems like it's something that was meant for you to be a part of.
Yeah, I was so thrilled. And honestly, I didn't even know mental health first aid existed until a friend of mine had brought it up. And it really is like first aid, but for mental health. So there's an action plan, and I'll go through it really quickly. But the middle of the plan is where we assess, like how do you properly assess for potential mental unwellness. And then that's happening all the time. And then the rest of the action plan starts with approach, like how do we properly approach someone when they're experiencing a potential mental unwellness? How do we like listen non-judgmentally, which takes practice? How do you give resources and information, which is different than advice? I think we live in a world where we're so quick to give advice for folks. And sometimes the best thing you can say is like, yeah, that shit sucks. Full stop. Right? And then like give them the reassurance that what they're going through is valid. And then we have oh my gosh. I know this.
It's a full
Give
moon today, and it's such a fucky one. So you're
Yeah,
so good.
we're
I
filming
know,
during the
okay.
full moon applying to Mars.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Encourage appropriate professional help. So, like, how do you actually escalate to a professional when needed? And then how do you encourage self-help and other support strategies? Knowing too that self-care is very important, and we'll probably dig into that a little bit more too. But I also like to say self-care is not all breath work and happy hours. Like sometimes self-care is cleaning the toilet.
Yeah.
You know, like
Mhm.
sometimes self-care is making that phone call that you are really dreading to make. Sometimes it's doing that action that maybe doesn't feel really great in the moment, but you're going to be setting your future self up for success. So I feel really strongly about the mental health first aid curriculum. I think everyone should be trained in it. But it is like, it's a time commitment. So it's a full day training, but then once you go through it, you're certified for 3 years. And it's again, all accredited by the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. Now, the other program that I had the pleasure of being a part of, we just launched this in September 2023, which is the Stop, Drop, and Roll for mental health. So that is ASK, which stands for Acknowledge, Support, and Keep in Touch. This program actually started as a program under Active Minds, which is a nonprofit, and it was originally VAR, which stood for Validate, Appreciate, and Refer. And MTV had been looking for programs out there where, like, how can we create the Stop, Drop, and Roll for mental health? They saw what Active Minds was doing, and they said, this is it, but VAR is not memorable. So, like, how can we judge this and make it the true Stop, Drop, and Roll? And so we all launched it, so again, September 2023 as Ask. And there's now a really cool interactive YouTube video that folks can watch where you can kind of go and have a safe space to practice these kinds of conversations. Because we also recognize too is that there's not a lot of easy ways to practice mental health conversations without it already being a potentially like tender situation. So the interactive YouTube video is a great place to start where you can actually learn how to support your friends by how do you properly acknowledge them, how do you properly support them, and then how do you keep the conversation going through, keep in touch. So I think those are the two primary programs I'm focused on right now for as it relates to mental health.
That's a
Amazing.
lot, first of all. Like you, whenever we work with you in other capacities as well. You have helped us with sacred spaces. You are a huge support in other group spaces that we've been in. And I often think to myself, like, if there's anybody in the world who should feel satisfied that they are doing enough to make the world a better place, you are the example of that. In my mind, that is sort of a template. So I really love that you have made this a tangible thing. Like a lot of us and a lot of our listeners grew up in a time where mental health was not a priority. And some of
Mhm.
us grew up in locations where mental health was actually laughed at. And when you get to a point where you start recognizing how important mental health is and you start thinking about, like you said, sometimes self-care is I showered today. Like that's a huge thing that a lot of
Mhm.
people will relate to and be like, oh, wow, I needed more mental health support at that time, or I need it now. And I think
Yeah.
it is underserved and underappreciated right now. And I love that you're doing things with it. Thank you.
Yeah. I think on that note too, it's just a self-care piece. 2 points. One with the self-care piece. I think people think that self-care should feel better immediately, like you're
Mhm.
doing something that feels good in that moment. Um, that's so profoundly not the case most of the time. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate that being called out. Like self-care actually typically doesn't feel super great. Like sometimes you get to take a bubble bath and that smells really nice and you feel good there, but sometimes you're like, I'm super, depressed or anxious or whatever, and I don't want to go out to dinner and do this thing, but I know that'd be best for me. Ah, shit. Like, here we go. Let's
Mhm.
go. Like or making that uncomfortable call, like you said. And I think that that's a really beautiful perspective shift that a lot of people I don't think are still equating it to. I talked about this a lot pretty early on in like the 2021 capacity of like trying to encourage people to like actually do spiritual self-care, which was a lot of times like not just meditating, it's doing this kind of spaces. So I appreciate that. The other thing that I wanted to oh no, come back. It was held on my finger. Come on.
Yeah. I mean,
Return.
you had it.
Return.
You
I
used the little
did.
gesture things that help so much.
I know. Oh no, I really wanted it too. Oh, yes. I think I got it. Thank you. Okay. Anyone who watches the YouTube, I
I know.
appreciate you.
We do
It's
great.
just stupid facial expressions. Um, It's fine. But I think that it's really cool to start really bringing the conversation into focus that mental health does not depend on just therapy. And I
Mhm.
think that like things like mental health first aid, where people are not decentralizing therapy, but I think a lot of times when people are like, oh, you need mental health support, they're like, well, I can't afford a therapist. It's like, that's not what I meant.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really cool space to step into this idea of mental health first aid. I took some mental health first aid classes when I was 2018, maybe. It was a long time ago. And I'm sure things have changed since then. But it was wonderful and really, really helpful. And I did it actually. I was HR at the time, and we supported a lot of employees that lived in employee housing, and they needed a lot of mental health support. So it was kind of like one of those things where we're like, sure, let's do it. And since then, it's been a very useful skill. So I do agree that everyone should know at least some of it because it's
Mhm.
important.
Yeah, because I mean, thank you. Because before I got trained in mental health first aid, it's like there are things that I realize now in retrospect where that I felt like I had the best intentions, right? And it's like I always want to provide the safe space or brave space for folks, and I had the best intentions. I want to lift people up. But then I went through the training and I realized, oh my gosh, there was some things I was doing that actually was technically unhelpful, right? Like,
Mhm.
so the example that I always use is that before I got trained, when someone came to me and if they said something like, I'm just like, how are you? And they're like, oh, I'm just like feeling really depressed right now. My standard response was something like, oh, but you have so much going for you. There's so many great things happening. Why don't you go outside, get some sun, and drink some extra water, and then everything will be better tomorrow. And then now if we break that down, it's like if my first response was, "Oh, but you have so much going for you. There's so many good things happening." I'm immediately invalidating their feelings, which is not
Mhm.
fair. Right? Like their feelings are their feelings and those are valid in that moment. And everyone is different. So something that might be a small T trauma for me might be a big T trauma for somebody else. And it's not helpful for me to invalidate their feelings right away. And
Mhm.
then by saying, oh, just go get some sunshine and drink some extra water, it's like, yeah, arguably that might help, but it may not, like, I don't want to say fix, but it might not fully regulate them. So then now they're like, they could potentially go into a spiral like, well, why didn't that like help me feel better? Or like, why can't I get better by just those things? If everyone else can. And the last piece saying everything's going to be better tomorrow, that's actually a promise I can't keep. Like, I
Mhm.
can't promise that everything is actually going to be better tomorrow. So a more helpful approach would have just said, yeah, like like you're valid in feeling that way, and I'm here to talk, or asking open-ended questions, or just kind of creating space for them to talk would be a much more helpful approach.
Mhm.
I also really appreciate a couple things in the context, of a lot of our folks and listeners are in a spiritual journey, and some of them are spiritual practitioners. And we don't acknowledge enough that spirituality gets entangled with mental health very frequently. And so mental health first aid, coaching skills, those things, in my opinion, more and more, and I would honestly say very decisively now, you should be required to have mental health training and coaching skills. And like you said, to
Mhm.
know when to escalate it to someone else. The amount of times where I've had someone come in, whether they're in a 12th house year or just feeling stuck or whatever's going on, and it's like you came here for more than I am qualified to provide. And so my go-to has been like, what resources do you have outside of this session that can support you? Because sometimes as practitioners, even as like if you're life coach certified, you're still not a psychiatrist. You're
Mhm.
still not a mental health professional. You're still not someone who can intervene with things when St. John's wort isn't making the depression go away. Like that kind of stuff. It's important in spirituality to know when there was a documentary on Netflix years ago about energy healing. And I loved this because they were like, energy healing is really good for preventative and in context with other treatment. If I break my arm, take me to the emergency room.
Mhm.
Like, don't reiki my broken arm. I need more than just that. Like, I need to make sure it's set properly and all that stuff. Reiki, sure, is effective, but there's a time and a place for each thing. And so in the era that we're living in now, more people I think will benefit from recognizing when they need mental health
Yeah.
assistance, and more practitioners are going to encounter people, and it'll benefit them to know when that person also needs support and to be able to offer resources the way you're saying. So I think this
Mhm.
is really, really important and timely.
Yeah. That. What are some mental health first aid strategies that you would recommend people employ or be aware of at the very least?
Yeah, thank you. I think some of the core things that you hear throughout like the training is one, like how you approach someone is could potentially make all of the difference. And it's always a spectrum, it's always relative. So like what is your relationship with that person? What do you know
Mhm.
about them? And doing it privately, so like not in a group setting.
Mhm.
Try to like maybe invite them to coffee and just have a conversation with them. And then the next, when you're having a conversation with someone, really strive to use I statements. So, like, I've noticed this. So, for example, I'm going to give you two examples and just kind of feel how these are received differently. So if I said, like, I noticed you haven't been coming to class, is one way to say it. But now, if I said, you haven't been coming to class, you can just feel how that's received differently. So when you use I statements, you kind of create a safer place for folks to open up if they're ready. If you start using a lot of you statements, it tends to put people on the defense where they're trying to validate their actions or kind of create explanations instead of giving them a space to actually open up. And so those are kind of some of the core things. I think another really simple one that you can start using right away is that, and I started using this back in 2020, is like when you ask someone like, how are you? And they go, good, great, fine. How are you? Good, great, fine. You can follow up with like, how are you really?
Mhm.
And then stop talking. And you might be really surprised at how honest people are when you kind of give them that space to be really genuine. So just like by asking that very specific question, like how are you really? But the key then is to not talk and like kind of give them a minute to process. Because that can be a trick too, is that sometimes, myself included, I'll sometimes want to fill the space. And
Mhm.
silence, especially for our neurospicy friends, again, like me, it's like sometimes they need a minute. So, like, be comfortable and letting folks like actually respond instead of just trying to fill the space immediately. So, I really love that
Yeah.
question. How are you really?
Mhm.
Yeah. I will say too, just kind of on the note of that, um, you're never obligated to go deeper with someone. And I want to be like
Mhm.
really clear with that because everyone's processing through their own mental health stuff, especially right now. I think one of the biggest things that has happened is in our lifetimes, in our space is we went from um, a society, a world who was very comfortable being uncomfortable because that was the normal state of being. That was a huge, most of humanity has been uncomfortable the
Mhm.
entire time. at no point in time up until very, 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 very recently have people started to expect comfort as the norm. And now we're sitting in this spot where we're now being thrust back into the human journey that occurred before us,
Mhm.
which is being completely and utterly uncomfortable a lot. And then we're all processing that. And that's very, very challenging. We're lucky to exist in a space where there is resources for that. However, if you're in a space and you're like, oh, yeah, I can use this. And then you start using it, but you notice that you are not in a balanced place to do so. Like, please have a check in for yourself too before you dive in. Because as just speaking to our audience, knowing how many of you are overgivers, love you so much, but you're definitely overgivers. And, you know,
Mhm.
like you want to help the world as we all do. That is, I think, an important check in to do
Yeah.
preemptively.
Yeah. A lot of us
Yeah.
want to be healers, and we have to recognize that we need to come from a full cup perspective to do
Mm.
that.
Yeah, and we actually talk about that in mental health first aid too, where it's like, okay, you go through the training, you're now a certified mental health first aider, but you were never required to use this training. And like a core fundamental piece that we repeat throughout the training is that you have to check in with yourself and make sure that you have the capacity to actually have a conversation with someone before you start it. Because if you're not in a place where you can actually provide the proper space for someone, it could potentially be an unhelpful situation, either for them and or you. And so, like knowing when you have the capacity and bandwidth to help someone is really important. It's like the classic airplane analogy.
Mm.
Like when the oxygen falls, you have to put your own mask on first before you can help anybody else.
Mhm.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about Ask then, since that is something that was like more recently developed. Like, what's that? What's that about?
It
Yes.
lights you up whenever it's mentioned. So I can't wait to give you the space to talk about it more.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been really fun. It's only been out in the world for just over a year. And like our goal is to make it the stop, drop, and roll of mental health because as we were talking about earlier too, is that I know the standard responses when it comes to mental health is like, oh, just get a therapist, but not everybody can have access to a therapist. And so what can we do to be better friends? Right. And really truly be there from a peer-to-peer perspective. And so Ask right now again is it's a interactive YouTube video, but like you can go and you can train and you basically you help Charlie have a conversation with his friend Luna at a coffee shop. And so you basically go into the video training on YouTube and then you choose kind of like a choose your own adventure where there's different options that pop up and you kind of guide Charlie on what to say to Luna. And I'll say there are some more helpful responses than others. And then there will be you'll kind of go back through a cycle if you maybe choose a slightly more unhelpful approach. But it's fun to watch people go through it and like see the light bulbs go off. So we actually brought the training to VidCon last year and we recreated the coffee shop, but instead of coffee, we had boba. And so as people were coming to the booth, you waited for a table, we sat you at a table, and then you watched the video. And once you were able to get to the end screen, then you got a ticket for free boba. Great, right? So everyone had a lot of fun, but what was really interesting to me is that and this was over 3 days. And so every day, multiple times a day, not often, but multiple times, you would have a parent come in with kind of some younger children, and the kids would get through the training fairly quickly. And there were sometimes that parents would be having a little bit of trouble. And so, like, the kids would have to help their parents, or sometimes I would come over and say, hey, do you want a hint? And there was even one individual who was like, well, yeah, but you want me to respond this way, and that's not how I would respond. And so I had to kind of gently say things like, well, maybe there's a more helpful approach you could consider to get you to the next phase of the video. And so it was just really eye-opening to me that there's still a lot of older ways of thinking,
Mm.
right? Like the cheer up buttercup generation,
Rub
which,
some dirt in it.
It's been so on
yeah.
that note. So I'm a young mom. Like I have currently today is actually my eldest daughter's birthday. So I now have a 13, 14, and 15-year-old child. So they're teenagers. But I am 32. So most people are like, "You what?" And I'm like, I know, but I do. I had my first kid when I was 18, so I'm a very younger mom. It has been very interesting to see how raising kids amongst kids that are being raised by parents that are much, much older than I am, and the difference in the relationships they are having with their parents and the support they're getting with their parents versus the way that I feel that I talk to my kids or that what they will bring to me, etc. Or they'll be like, "Mom, like this person's parent didn't listen. Like, what do I tell them?" And things like that. And I'm like, it is just that old way of thinking in very applied to very modern problems that aren't, it's not meeting. It's not
Mhm.
meeting at all. Which is just a wild thing to watch. So you saying that, I'm like, yeah, not surprised,
Yeah.
honestly, especially with the way that I think this generation, being Gen Beta or whatever they are, Gen Alpha, Gen
They're
Alpha,
Gen
being
Beta. The newest one coming in is Gen Beta.
okay, but they're not born yet.
They're being born now.
Okay, so Gen Alpha then.
Yeah. Hmm.
Having the Gen Alpha come in and just kind of have an intuitive intrinsic knowledge about how to handle these
Hmm.
things, which is wild to me. And I'm sure that's like part of what souls chose to come and those types of things. And then versus looking at, Gen X and older, even older millennials not having that intrinsic
Hmm.
sense. It's a very wild, energetic experience to be a part of, to be totally honest.
Also, for anybody who's listening and being like, "Oh, Em's just probably biased because she's a mom," blah, blah. No, I've seen her parent her kids. I have heard the stories. I've been here for the last 5 years. Em's a good mom. So
Thank you. I appreciate you.
you're
And
welcome.
I'm not biased. I'm constantly like, well, mess that
Hmm.
up. My bad, guys. Just
Yeah.
totally wrecked that. And I'm not at all. It's just, it's been a very interesting experience because at the start of the parenting, not to get too much on a tangent. Well, I mean, frick it, all this podcast is tangents. But at the
You're
start of
not
my
wrong.
parenting journey, I was looked down on very significantly because I was super duper young. I'd go to like the preschool meetups or whatever, and people would give me horrible looks because I was a baby, like I was so young. And now reaching into this part of the parenting journey where, my eldest is in high school, my older two are in their last couple of years in middle school, in that sort of space. I don't get that look so much anymore. However, I do see the discrepancy in ways the kids have been raised or navigated because I was like, you are not getting technology. Like, we're hard limiting all of that. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not criticizing anyone's parenting. However, I am saying that like a lot of the kids had unfettered access to technology because their parents had the internet as a teenager, where I did, and those types of things. So there's just this very weird kind of opposition. And I think everyone's a beautiful, wonderful parent. I'm not like criticizing. I'm really not. But it's just been a very interesting experience. And mental health is another space that I see that showing up in.
Hmm.
Yeah, and actually on my list of like resources, one of the things I always recommend too, there's a great article, which I'll give you all the links you can put in the description, but it's like how to program your phone to be a tool, because your phone should be a tool, not your boss.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
All the default like settings on your phone are typically set to grab your attention, capture your attention, keep your attention. Like your attention and time is like one of the most valuable resources you have. And so actually dedicating time to program your phone to minimize, the notifications and the
Hmm.
drawing you to the phone. So it becomes more of you are going to your phone versus your phone calling you to
Hmm.
it. That can be a good use of time.
Yeah. So speaking of that,
Hmm.
obviously, this month sucks, as does politics
Yeah.
in a lot of
Yes.
different ways. What are some tips, tools, tricks, advice, whatever comes to mind that you would give people who are struggling with uh the world?
Dying at M basically voguing the tips and tools and advice. Your tips, your tools, your advice.
Here for it.
But help.
Um, I have so many. And again, I'll make sure that you will all have links to all this so you can link it into the description. But I'll just start from the top and feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. But one of the ones that I like to start with too is like any meeting that I have that I'm holding, whether it be a business meeting or a friend group meeting, I like to do a stoplight check-in just to like gauge where people are coming from. This is something I had to learn too, because oftentimes I'll want to like jump right into business, but we're also
Mhm.
humans, and especially with so much going on in the world, we can't just pretend like that stuff isn't happening. So doing a stoplight check-in is just like it sounds, where it's like you have green, yellow, red on the stoplight. So green is I'm great, yellow is I'm in the middle, and red is like I'm in the red zone. Now, folks can be anywhere on the spectrum. I've been burnt orange before. I'm often lime green. People can be totally off the spectrum and be rainbow or purple or blue. But the key there is it's a couple different things. One, you allow everyone in space to like check in with themselves, which especially too as a recovering chronic people pleaser, like I was always checking in with other people, but not always checking in with myself. And so going around the room gives everyone a chance to really have that mindfulness moment where it's like, how am I doing? Like what, if I could assign a color to it, what would that color be? And the trick here too is that people can share as much or as little as they want. They can also skip or pass. They're not required to participate. But also, there's no rescuing and dwelling. So this is not a therapy session. This is not a trauma dump session. This is just like, hey, I'm feeling orange because I have some personal stuff going on, and then you move on. And so then too, as a leader and as a good friend, you can kind of know, all right, where is everyone at in the room? And so then if somebody is a little bit short or a little bit, like I'll use air quotes, salty, but they were in the red zone, you just know they're in the red zone and you're not going to take it as personally. So doing those stoplight check-ins with your groups is really, really helpful. Uh, my next tool, like if I'm feeling like I'm in the orange or red zone, there's a great acronym that I love called HALT, which looks like you halt and it's like, am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Now, for me,
I like
I'm almost
that.
always hungry.
Yeah, I was gonna say hungry 100% of the time.
Yep. My mom figured that out early when I was like younger in my teens. And when I would start getting snippy with her, she'd be like, when was the last time you ate? I was like, damn, she's right again. I'm hungry. But like almost all, like that's a good, like just recognize, okay, if I am feeling in the orange or red, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? And again, it's just like kind of checking in with yourself and giving yourself that space.
I
Um,
like it.
yeah. The next one I like to go over is like really taking control of your morning routine. Like how you start your day can be incredibly important. And so if you think about what your brain is doing, like when you're sleeping and when you're waking up, it's like when you're in the deep sleep, that's called the delta waves. When you're light sleep, that's the theta waves. When you're relaxed or sleepy, that's alpha waves. And then during your most awake activities is beta waves. And then while you're concentrating, focusing, and learning, that's gamma rays. Now, I go over that because, and again, I used to be really bad about this, but when you wake up and you roll over and you immediately grab your phone, what you're doing is you're now jump starting your brain from those like beta waves all the way up to the active brain waves. And you're basically putting your brain into immediate dopamine seeking mode for the rest of the day. Because it's like we've now skipped the theta and the beta wave, like we've skipped all these steps. And then like what happens when you pick up your phone right away and you see something in the news or something that maybe is a little bit triggering for you that could set the tone for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And so I now try to keep my phone away from the bed or even in a different room. So then I just don't have that, what's the word? So I don't have even the ability to roll over and grab my phone.
Like the temptation.
The temptation, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Because then like really give yourself the opportunity to wake up. And I haven't been doing this recently, but I've been called to do it again and start doing morning pages. So the first thing when you wake up, instead of grabbing your phone, grab a journal and then just write for 3 pages, like total stream of consciousness when you're in that theta state. That can be really helpful too, just to wake your brain up in a natural space. Also, you might be surprised at some of the thoughts and interesting things that come up in that time, and then you can process things without putting your brain in dopamine seeking mode for the rest of the day.
Honestly, it's really interesting. The first thing you do in a day, I had an experience this fall of how truly important that is. The election happened 1 week after this surgery that made me feel so much better about myself. And I had this week of bliss of being like, wow, I actually think I have no more problems. I think I've solved some of my anxiety. Like I'm feeling really good and I've got a lot of things figured out. Yay. And then the morning after the election, Dan had to come in every morning and help me sit up because of the way things were. So there was a good month where every morning I would be woken up by Dan coming in and like saying hello. And it was this lovely way to wake up. And this one, I woke up and I was like, it was my like second night sleeping flat on my back in my own bed. I finally slept well for the first time. I'm feeling like I'm doing really well. And I thought because Mercury retrograde was coming up and all this other stuff. And I'm like, we're going to take maybe a day to actually get results on this. Uh, and I woke up and I was like, hey, I actually had a really good night. And Dan was like, I'm glad you have something good to think about. And immediately my whole world shattered because I was like, no, no, it didn't happen. And he was like, it happened more than you can imagine. And so this first moment of my day for the next month, I had to finally identify, like, Dan, I think not that you did anything wrong, but I think that of me coming out of sleep like that and getting that news traumatized me a little bit, because every time he woke me up from then on, I was like, who died? What's wrong? Like, immediately panicked as soon as I was awake. So the morning routine thing, I actually had to walk myself back and reform that a little bit. And I really like your tips about it, because journaling was a huge thing for me at the time. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Because it's true. It's like your brain is still waking up, even though we feel alert. Your brain is like still has some work to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you can make that time sacred, I do like the idea that it is sort of a cornerstone of the day.
And doing a physical action like writing and something will wake your
Mm-hmm.
brain up, because I know a lot of people do actually use like social media / their phone to wake up so that they
Mm-hmm.
actually wake up. Which I understand, we are all deeply and profoundly overworked. I'm just going to validate that for everybody. Like, our labor is massively undervalued and super overutilized. And if you're feeling exhausted, that's because you are. Like, that's because you are, because the world has been set up in a way that doesn't benefit anybody but a very few people, and that causes a lot of exhaustion and burnout and those types of things. So if you're like, but I need that to get up to get going in the morning, like, there is doing something like that physical action, especially using theta. Theta is your channeling brainwave. That's the way that you're actually connecting and channeling in and tapping into the energy of your
Mm-hmm.
guides or those types of things too, and pulling that into space. It will do the same thing, even though it doesn't feel as immediately fun to do. So just to put that perspective there, or a card pull will do the same thing too. If you don't want to do journaling, that's fine. Roll over, grab your card, shuffle. What am I doing today? And plop that down. And now you're reading. And now you're in a
Mm-hmm.
space of reading. And that also is going to engage very similar energy. So just to throw that out there, because I know that that is like a tool people use, and losing tools right now is a scary thing. It doesn't have to be though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you're restless, like stretches or exercises or off-screen activities,
Hmm.
we
Yeah.
forget that we have those options.
It's true. I love that. And as part of this, like the large article about how to program your phone, if you
Mhm.
find yourself, if you're like having a hard time breaking that habit of grabbing your phone, put your phone in grayscale before you go to bed. So then when you wake up, it's in grayscale. I actually
Mhm.
have a hotkey to turn my phone grayscale to help me with some of my doom scrolling,
Mhm.
because then when it's all grayscale, your brain is actually like, ah, this isn't as interesting.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah. My phone goes grayscale half an hour before I go to bed, so that I'm like, I don't even want to play with it.
Our brain is such a pet. Like, it's such a pet. Like, oh, that toy stopped squeaking. I'm good.
Mhm.
Lay
So
down over here. It's like, oh, awesome.
no more
So
pretty
glad that's what's
colors.
driving the ship.
Yeah.
Oh my
Oh,
God. All right, I'm gonna keep going.
go for it.
So the next tool is like putting together your self-care plan. And so using the stoplight check-in analogy, it's like you want to put your self-care plan together when you're more in the green, yellow zone. If you're already moving towards the orange and red zone, that's not the time that you want to create your self-care plan. And so try to do that when you're feeling in a good mood. So like, and then we'll have a template for you, but like what lights you up intellectually, emotionally, environmentally, physically, community, like write all those things out. So then when you do feel yourself kind of going into those denser places, you have a toolkit that you can go to.
Mhm.
I like
Yeah,
that.
it reminds me of I think they're called dopamine menus now, of like things that you can do to make yourself feel good. And it can be like bake cookies or whatever, but you have a list of it so that when you feel yourself in that space of, ugh, I'm going to go back to do this thing because I have nothing else to do, you actually have a menu of things that you can pick the one that lights you up the most to do.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Yes, love that. Next, speaking of being overworked, like take breaks. Like I used to be this person, like I convinced myself I was too busy. I'm too busy. I can't take a break. I have to eat lunch at my desk. I'm too busy. And then there was actually like a scientific study that came out and it was actually able to prove that people who leave their desk at lunch and go eat lunch away from their desk for 15, 20, 30 minutes, and when they come back, they're actually more productive the second half of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're humans, we need breaks. And so like program them, put them on your calendar. Like breaks are productive,
Mm-hmm.
period.
Yeah.
As is rest, which is
Yeah.
something I have harped on till I've gone red in the face.
Mm-hmm.
Please rest. Please rest. Rest is good and healthy. You want to be a better spiritual person? Rest. Do you
Yeah.
want to be a more activated person? Rest. Do you want to have a better connection with your spirit guides? Rest. Because if you don't do it intentionally, they're going to take your body away from you
I was
and
gonna
make you sick
say.
as hell. And it sucks. And that's how they will force you to rest. So
Mm-hmm.
don't do that. Go the other direction.
Yeah. It will find you if you don't find it first.
Yes,
Mhm.
and stressing about rest is not rest.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Um, the next tool, speaking of social media, going back to social media,
Yeah.
there is a Chrome application or a Chrome extension that you can put in your browser. It's called the Newsfeed Eradicator, and I love it. I love it. What it does, and it works on multiple like Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, and Twitter. It hits all the big ones. And when
Mm-hmm.
you have it installed, if you go to that social media, it basically blows out the newsfeed entirely and just puts an inspirational quote.
Okay, I love that though.
It's great. Now
Oh my
we know
gosh.
like you still have to post if you're running a business, but so you can still post and you can still click into things, but it just does it's the newsfeed eradicator. It just completely
Mm-hmm.
blows out the newsfeed, um, which is lovely.
See, this is another point I wanted to make sure that we do cover with you is the fact that, in the era we're living in, staying informed feels very important. But there is so much misinformation and fear
Mm.
mongering, and especially this is horrible to feel, but and it's not horrible to say, which is why I chose my words, in the spiritual community and in a lot of the things that we are involved in, if you're not fear mongering for a political reason or whatever, you're fear mongering to get followers. And people are following these accounts and panicking and getting stuck in that. I see this as an astrologer, folk magic, psychic mediumship. It's all over. People who have their own, like you can tell they're coming from a fear place and a place of lack. So they need those followers. So they're going to do it, however, instead of doing it in an aligned way. How do you recommend we almost filter our timelines or consciously choose our attention and where we give it on social media? Do you have resources for that, or is that like unexplored
Yeah.
territory?
Well, I think one, yes, underscore that entirely because like news anxiety is a real thing.
Mm,
And
Mhm.
it's, there's actually a great book. If you want to go down that rabbit hole about why the news is the way that it is, there's a book called Trust Me, I'm Lying by Ryan Holiday. It's amazing. If you want to like really understand why the news is the way that it is, it
mhm.
is a very interesting read. But that also for me showed me too is that I just can't trust the regular news, especially the local news. Like I stopped watching the local news a very long time ago because it just didn't like the way it made me feel. It was
Mhm.
so fear-based. So my recommendation would be like find the people that you know you can trust. Right now, like I honestly, I almost only get my news through a handful of sources. One of them is Under the Desk News.
Yes.
V is incredible. We worked with V during the campaign and they came out with us, but like them, I trust, right? So
Mhm.
it's like they can be in my newsfeed and I'm subscribed to them on YouTube and all those other places. I trust the news that's coming from them. I also I like to watch Stephen Colbert as like one of my news sources. It's like I don't know if you can count that as news, but at least gives me the headlines. But I recognize too that's also a filter. So I'm
Mhm.
actually on the lookout too for other international news sources. I think that's maybe potentially a healthy way, but honestly, I don't have if folks have recommendations, I'd love to hear them too because
Mhm.
I want to limit my news, but I also don't want to not get news at all. And so
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
So there's a newsletter I get. It's called 1440, and it is super committed to being unbiased news, and it just gives you headlines.
great.
Yeah, 1440 because of the printing press and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Love that. Okay, I'll sign up for that for sure.
I I predominantly look for news that comes out of usually England,
Mm-hmm.
or Australia.
BBC or
So I
stuff.
do a lot
Yeah.
of BBC is great with that. I also really like anything that Russell Howard does because he does a lot of Stephen Colbert-esque, but in the UK. Um, he's super good for that type of thing 'cause I very much prefer external perspective, which, by the way, the entire world is talking about us. If you guys
Yeah.
don't know, because the US, our main source of world perspective is actually TikTok at the moment. That is where we get
Mm-hmm.
the most perspectives from around the world. And you guys know better than I do if it gets extended, because you guys are in the future. We're in the past.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know. Today is the day Supreme Court says. So we'll see
Yeah.
how that goes. But we might be losing that. But we don't, the rest of the world gets to talk and think about the rest of the world in a way that the US does not. And if you don't get to travel a lot or you don't get to be out of that bubble, it's truly the rest of the world gets to understand everything and we get to see
Mm-hmm.
everything from a US centric perspective, which is because our country's a toddler. That's why.
Yeah.
That is it.
Yeah.
Um,
History
our country's a,
wise, absolutely.
yeah, history wise, actions wise,
Everything. Mm-hmm.
everything wise, we're a toddler. However, the rest of the world talks about the rest of the world. And right now, the rest of the world is genuinely speaking about us, but from a very external perspective. So I think, especially right now, if you're wondering like what is going on, see if you can even just YouTubing like news sources from here, news sources from there, especially if you're more like neutral news sources or that type of thing, because everyone does has their own politics.
Mm-hmm.
Really important to go from other countries. Like foreign news is super essential right now.
Yeah.
Also, V's one of my mutuals. I absolutely adore them. Under
Same.
This News is fantastic. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
mhm,
We'll support them. Yeah, it's so funny. When we were in Japan, I was in the gyms every morning and their news had our politics on them. And I was just like,
mhm.
God dang, like I don't want to be that interesting. Just I don't want
No.
us to I want us to like this is my big thing that I've been doing with religion, and I think the US could do it too. Rather than centralizing ourselves so much, can we just be part of the circle? I would like that. Just to calm
Hmm.
down a little bit.
Alas, no.
Clearly. Yeah.
I will say, I'm like, why don't we? Let's just be Iceland. Other than a volcano
Hmm.
eruption, we don't really hear anything about Iceland. Let's just
Yep.
be like
And they're
Iceland.
happy and they're reading books on Christmas Eve. And yeah,
And they're led
let's
by a
do that.
woman. Wild.
Oh my
Um,
goodness. Oh, wow. So I'm looking at some of the stuff here because we had a long list of things that we wanted to bring up with you. And we have covered so many of them just through the natural flow of your education of us this episode. And I mean that in the best, most praise of ways. Um, how can people support what you do more?
mhm,
Ooh, thanks for asking. Right now, I will be doing more mental health first aid trainings this year.
mhm,
And so if you want to get in on that, you can go to my website, which is hopewithfacts.com.
Mhm.
I have not set the dates yet. I kind of want to crowdsource the dates because it is a full day. And so when I schedule them, I want to make sure that folks are available for that whole day to get the certification. So if this is something that is interesting to you and you want to get certified as a mental health first aider, just sign up on my website, let me know, and then we can start to coordinate dates from there.
Mhm. Amazing. I recommend it for everybody. I know we're going to be incorporating it into every Sacred Spaces event and all of those things. It's more important now than ever. Um, and I think it's really important that we all try to figure out what being a part of the solution looks like for us. And I think this is a huge tangible step. Is there anything else that you would recommend people consider? Do you have any thoughts about ways to feel like you're taking enough action without overwhelming yourself?
Well, I think the next best thing to mental health first aid would be to go through the Ask like video training. It's
Hmm.
so simple. You just go to asktohelp.com. It'll take you to the interactive YouTube video and go through it. It's really easy. It's only a couple minutes long. It'll be longer if you choose the more unhelpful versions, but it's still a learning opportunity. So,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And then it'll take you to a really nice landing page where you can dive in a little bit deeper as well. But that is like something you could do today that would only take a couple of
Mhm.
minutes.
And for everybody who's listening, we are going to put all of these resources because Angela is so gracious and kind. If you will share those links with us, which I think we already talked about, but we will have those in the description of this episode for you to take advantage of so that you will have direct access to all of these resources, which we are so, so, so grateful for, Angela. Thank you.
Thanks.
yeah. One last thing I just want to note, and it- I'm sure that this will validate for everything for both of you, but these only work if we have each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one caveat of all of these tools and techniques is like
Mm-hmm.
people need people. We're herd animals. That's just what it is. So whether that is you find a group that supports you, whether you just hear it on this podcast and that's fine, or you engage in social media stuff, or you use your actual friends and maybe get your friends in on this, or join a spiritual group or have a coven or those types of things. Like that is so
Mm-hmm.
essential for our mental health to be balanced. We do actually need other people. And there are so many ways to find other people right now, more so than ever before in the history of all of time. We
Mm-hmm.
can find people despite the fact that we're all very lonely, but that is, again, something that is not a requirement. That's something that's been designed for us that we didn't pick, and we can change that. So I want to highlight all of this as if you're feeling like, okay, but I don't have someone to do this for me, or we can find that, we can lean in on that and have that support. And it's super necessary and required right
Mm-hmm.
now more than ever before, but also truly easier to find right now more than ever before because there is truly a whole world in your little rectangle that you get to carry around on a daily basis. So please lean in and use that in any way you can to find those people as well. So just want to highlight that.
Well stated, M.
Cool. Should we go make some magic together, team?
Do you want to do it with us, Angela?
Oh, I'm so ready.
It's going to
Okay, are we
be
ready?
gorgeous because we started so well, right? So
Ah, oh my God. For the reference, if we're talking about like colors today, my color is just like a strange metallic purple over here
I was
situation.
gonna say, like,
So
mine is
like,
the rustiest of oranges.
okay, you're at least
Mm,
on the light. That's kind of
I
fun.
am on the light. I'm on the light.
I'm like
What
a
I'm
about
lemon
you?
swinging.
lime. I'm like a
You're a
lemon
lemon lime?
lime.
Lemon
Yeah.
lime. That's great.
I
That's
love
great.
that. I love that.
By the way, everybody,
I-
this episode was brought to you by the full moon in Cancer conjunct Mars. The week is so if you've been through the week already, this is the week where the full moon conjoins with Mars in retrograde. Mars doesn't like being in Cancer, so it's a little bit spicy, and that's going to go with
Mhm.
us for a couple days this week. Mars also reaches though the halfway point of his retrograde this week, and I
Ooh,
just
fuck
want to
you, Mars.
celebrate that. Yes, that is how we can do that. So yay, you're just about halfway there. Much of what we are, figuring out because of how we other F word around is going to reveal. We're getting to the part where we've learned and now we grow. So I
That's a
hope
nice
that
way to put it,
helps.
Krista. I'm sitting over here like we're getting to the part where we better start lighting shit on fire.
I know.
Actually, like,
Mhm.
hello, the
Okay,
French
but
invented the guillotine and then moved on to pirates.
the
Like,
French invented the guillotine during a solar eclipse on Algol, which is the headless star. So I just want to put that out there too.
man,
But also, I know you learn a lot about history when you get into
Sometimes.
astrology. But what I want to say is if you're going to light stuff on fire, do it consciously, do it for the right reasons. Check in with yourself, ask
mhm,
yourself, must I light this thing on fire? Is it the right thing? Because there are fires going on right now. I want to be really conscious about that.
yeah.
That, there are
No,
fires
don't
that
light the
are,
forest. We love the forest.
yeah,
We stand
no,
the forest.
yeah. Other people's
That's
houses,
not what I'm
don't do
saying.
that. But burn the things that need to be remade and make sure you
Hmm.
check in with your spirituality, with your authority. Just be very sure that whatever you decide, metaphorically or literally, it is aligned with your values and things. Empower, don't enact revenge because it's just, not as helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Um,
respond, try to respond instead of react.
yeah, yeah,
Respond instead of react fits better for
yeah,
me. I'm like, no,
yeah.
there's certain people that deserve revenge that I am
Okay,
fucking
so things can
manifesting for
ultimately,
them in my whole being. I'm like,
if the motivation is revenge though, like there are things that I have done that I'm like, I hope that this person gets what they deserve so that we end up in a better world. That's
yes,
that's that's where I'm at. And
yes,
sometimes I know I sometimes I get to be a part of that process and sometimes I just have to sit and wait and hope. Um, so
yeah. And
yeah.
sometimes people deserve consequences to their actions that they're not receiving. And that's the
Yes,
other part of that.
that's totally aligned
Will
with
it
it.
make the
Yeah.
world better? I don't know, but hopefully it makes their soul journey better. Get that
Yeah.
consequence.
Yep. Yeah. If you just check to see that you're being called, that it's you that's being called in to do whatever you feel like doing. And if you're not being called to something, ask your guides or the universe or your conscience, whatever you want to do, where can I actually take action? And,
Mhm.
maybe getting mental health certification is a great first step.
Beautiful segue. Let's make some fucking magic because we're out of time.
Okay. Okay.
Ready?
Let's go.
1, 2, 3. Go
Go
make
make
some
some
magic. We
magic.
Magic.
timed that like shit.
No,
Oh my god, I'm so
but
fast.
I thought it was good again. It was
There
a
was like
choir.
a 5-second delay on
It was
mine.
a choir of angels. I don't know what you're
Oh
talking
gosh.
about.
Surround
Yeah.
sound.
It does actually.